Not too long ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Alaska for a women's retreat. And my hostess and I were making a several-hour trek through the mountains to get to the retreat center. And I remember just sitting there absolutely mesmerized by the beauty around me. I was there in October, and so there were red and gold and yellow leaves on the trees at the base of the mountains, and there were snow-capped peaks at the top. And the seasons were just colliding, and I just have never seen anything like it. But then suddenly, we turned a corner, and the entire mountainside went black. There was no tall trees, there was no color, there was no life. And so I asked my new friend, when did the fire happen? And I was shocked to hear her say it had been over 2 years since that forest fire had taken out hundreds of acres on multiple mountainsides. I sat there kind of quietly grieving the loss of such untouched beauty, and then came a response even more unexpected. She said that the fire was a good thing. How can that be? She went on to say that, of course, initially it was very devastating. I mean, the sheer number of firefighters that it took to get this thing under control was overwhelming. But in the end, it will be very beneficial. I asked her what she meant by this, and so she explained that the forest is full of overgrown underbrush, and the forest floor is covered with all kinds of useless debris. And when a fire comes through and clears all of that out, it has multiple benefits. For one thing, it opens up space where the sky and the rain and the sun can reach the soil, and it makes it much more nutrient rich. Of course, that soil in turn will bring about new trees that will actually grow stronger and healthier than the trees that were there before. Also, the water sources on the mountainside are now going to grow because there's less plant life pulling from them. And new grass, new herbs, new berries for the animal life, multiple layers of benefit. Now, she said, of course, it's going to take a while for that new life to be able to be seen, but you can just know it's there. It's there underneath, and it's growing, and it's developing, and it's transforming. It's getting stronger every day. Now, in our previous session, we stepped right off the bus of some severe moral decline of the Israelites in the book of Judges, and we stepped right into a puddle of deep despair of one Israelite woman, Naomi. That first chapter was full of contrast. Naomi's own words of, I came full and I'm walking away empty. And even Naomi's name changed from pleasant to bitter. That bookends the first chapter. And not just the first chapter, but the entire book of Ruth is bookended with family. But in the end, it's family that's strong and something to be proud of and thankful for. And in the beginning, well, it's hard to imagine a more devastating story for a family. But here's the thing. Naomi is not the only one grieving. So I'd like to start back in chapter 1 with Ruth's response to Naomi in verses 16 and 17. Now, Ruth's push here to go with her mother-in-law to Bethlehem, it is the epitome of impractical. Ruth has also lost a husband. Ruth is quite possibly barren. Ruth has no wealth. She has no prospects for the future. In Judah, she will now become the immigrant. I mean, the only chance that Ruth has is to return home and hope that someone will give her another chance at being a wife. But this, she refuses. And here we have another contrast. The response of Orpah versus the response of Ruth. Now, these responses aren't put in here so that we can say, oh, Orpah's bad and Ruth is good. No, it's to show that Orpah, her decision is sensible and Ruth's is ridiculous. So what is this response? Is it just an emotional declaration? No. No, what Ruth says here is anything but compulsive. Her response is measured. It is well thought out. It is resolute and sincere. She does not just wax poetic. She is making vows, covenant promises, both to her mother-in-law and to her mother-in-law's God. She is saying that while things may look like all is lost, I am here to fight for life. Listen to her words. But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." Do you hear this? This is not a child crying, "Please take me with you." No, this is a woman saying, "I will remain by your side, and I will be faithful. I will care for you as if I were your own daughter." And her oath to die with Naomi and to be buried alongside her, this is her public declaration that she is now formally leaving her land and her family. She is choosing Naomi to be her home and her future. And you need to understand, this is not a lucrative partnership for Ruth. This is all about Naomi. Just like when Naomi urged Ruth to go home, that wasn't for Naomi. It was for Ruth. So you see, even in their demoralized state, the gospel is alive within them. And part of the beauty of the gospel is that when the rest of the world would implode under the pressure of loss and doubt and fear, the believer chooses to look upward and outward. The believer chooses to believe that growth is still possible, that transformation is happening, even in the ashes. And right here in this moment, the gospel is going to save the lives of these two women because they are choosing to care about the other instead of themselves. And so the end of chapter 1 finishes this way in verse 22. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was just beginning. This is the perfect transition to chapter 2, where we are going to see these covenant promises quite literally put to work. So let's start chapter 2, but let's start in verse 2. Here's what it says. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, "Girl, we are in session 3. It is time to talk about Boaz." I know, we all want to talk about Boaz, and there's a lot to talk about. He's worth talking about, and we're going to do that in a minute. But I promise you, I just need to set the scene a little bit, because if you were not raised on an ancient Palestinian farm, you're going to miss a few things here, okay? So first of all, what does it mean to glean? And was it really common practice to go and pick up grain out of the dirt in a stranger's field? Good questions. Mosaic law actually did call Israelite landowners to allow gleaners in their field. Here's how this would work. After the grain had been cut by harvesters, then you would have reapers come along and gather all of the grain that had been cut and put it into bushels. After they were done, then gleaners would be allowed in the field. Gleaners were the poor, and a lot of times they were widows or orphans or the like. And one place that we see this mentioned is in Deuteronomy 24. Listen to what it says. When you're harvesting in your field and you overlook a sheaf, do not go back and get it, but leave it for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat the olives from your trees, do not go over the branches a second time, but leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. When you harvest the grapes in your vineyard, do not go over the vines a second time. Leave what remains for the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that is why I command you to do this. Now, 3 times we see these labels, the foreigner, the fatherless, and the widow. And interestingly enough, Ruth fits all 3. And this isn't the only time in the law that we see these kinds of accommodations made for the poor. Later in Deuteronomy 28, it says, at the end of every 3 years, bring all the tithes of that year's produce and store it in your towns, so that the Levites who have no allotment or inheritance of their own, and the foreigners, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns may come and eat and be satisfied, and so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. So, yes, this was common practice, and a good Israelite landowner would keep these laws to a T. But there's a good Israelite, and then there's Boaz. It's time. Now, we see right here in verse 1 that Boaz is rich. Boaz is powerful. But there's nothing in this text that says tall, dark, and handsome. I'm sorry to disappoint. It's not there. But instead, we get something better. Boaz is a man of valor. In our NIV, it says he's a man of standing. In the NLT, it says influential. In the ESV, he's a worthy man. And just for fun, the KJV says a mighty man. And now every 90s teen is singing Salt and Pepper. What a man, what a man, what a man, what a mighty good man. Enough of that. You get the point. Boaz is legit. He is honorable. He is a man of excellent character. We're going to see this throughout the rest of the book. He is deserving of every superlative. Now, we should probably set the hip hop aside and return to the text. So start in verse 3. So she set out, and she went and she gleaned in the field after the reapers, and she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She's the young Moabite woman who's come back with Naomi from the country of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." So she came, and she's continued from early morning until now, except for a very short rest. And we're going to come back to the Boaz and Elimelech piece, but for now, look at verse 4, when Boaz arrives to the field. You know, the common expectation here is that this is where the love story begins. Ruth finds peace and hope when her eyes meet his. She feels safe under his gaze, right? She just knows, like something's going to be well here. But here's an unexpected thought. What if it's not what Ruth saw, but what she heard? A greeting, a word of praise, an invitation for Israel's God to be present with them in the barley field. Yeah, Ruth, I believe she felt peace in this moment, but not because of a lingering gaze, but because of the hope shared in this covenant, a hope in their allegiance to the one true God. This isn't about butterflies in her stomach. This is about a song in her heart. Now, next, we see Boaz trying to identify this new gleaner in his field. And it seems a little bit odd that such an important landowner would happen to notice just another poor community member gleaning in his field. And of course, the expectation here is that this is where the love story really takes off. Obviously, he notices her because she's so breathtakingly beautiful, right? The man in charge just said she's been here all day. Bending down, standing up, bending down, standing up. She's working in the heat of a late spring day. I don't think she's looking all that great, okay? No, there's another reason why Boaz recognizes her right away, and it comes in Ruth's request. She says, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." Now, Boaz clearly followed the law. He was, after all, an upstanding citizen. We know that. And so there were gleaners in his field. And the expectation, the common understanding here, is that Ruth is just asking politely if she can join them. But here's something unexpected. She's not being polite. She's being bold. Some scholars believe that what Ruth is asking here is if she could come in before the gleaners, if she could work right alongside the reapers, following the harvesters directly, picking up full stocks of grain. It would seem that Ruth is not trying to take home dirty leftovers off the ground for her poor, frail mother-in-law. She wants the good stuff. So Ruth essentially challenges the law and tradition here. Here's what she's saying to Boaz. Laws? Those are easily doable. But love requires sacrifice. I like how author Carolyn James puts it in her book. She says, the letter of the law says, let them glean. But the spirit of the law says, feed them. And our mighty good man, Boaz, he rises to the occasion. And what we see next is that he empowers Ruth, he provides for her, and he protects her. Boaz empowers Ruth by affirming her bravery in making this very unordinary request. He tells her to stay close to his reapers, the women who are employed by him. And actually, the word used there is the same word for when she clung to Naomi in chapter 1. And these are his employees. They are gathering for his harvest, and he is inviting her and telling her and even encouraging her to act as one of them, but for her benefit, not for his. Then he provides for her in a couple of ways. In verse 9, he instructs her to drink the fresh water that he's providing for his employees. And in verse 15, he instructs his workers to drop stalks of grain on purpose so that she might have more, better, more intact barley to take home to her mother-in-law. And finally, he protects her. He instructs every man in that field to keep their hands off. Unfortunately, it wasn't uncommon for gleaners, particularly widows, to be taken advantage of in situations like this. They didn't have anyone looking out for them. But not today, not Ruth, because Boaz is a man of valor. And so Ruth is not forgotten or dismissed. In fact, quite the opposite is true. She is remembered and invited. Look at verse 14. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she even had some left over. Okay, this is so upside down. Ruth has nothing. Boaz has more than enough. She is an outsider. He is an insider. He is powerful. She is powerless. He is wealthy. She is the definition of destitute. Her identity is completely shattered. Everyone knows who Boaz is. Boaz has the advantage of being a man. Ruth is in danger simply by being a woman. And yet, she is a gleaner, dining with reapers. She is a Moabite, eating with Israelites. He is a man serving a woman. He is the rich serving the poor. He is the master serving the servant. This is so countercultural, it would blow my mind, except for that it reminds me of someone, another influential, worthy, mighty man of standing. Boaz here, he reminds me of Jesus. And you know what? So does Ruth. Don't miss this in verse 10 and following. Ruth asks Boaz why he's being so kind to her, and he responds essentially with Proverbs 19. Those who lend to the Lord will be rewarded for what they have done. This is what he says in verse 11. Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land, and you've come to a people that you did not know before. Will the Lord repay you for what you have done? And a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. So it turns out that Boaz isn't the only one with a reputation around here. News about Ruth has traveled fast, and because of her covenant devotion to Naomi, she is now being shown covenant kindness by Boaz. Scholars estimate that Ruth brought home 30 plus pounds of barley that day, which says a lot about both Boaz's generosity and Ruth's tenacity. But Babylonian records indicate that a typical wage for a male worker in that day would have been 1 to 2 pounds. So this means that in one day, Ruth comes home with 15 times what Boaz's harvesters would have earned. And not only does Ruth come home with all of this food for the future, that's a huge blessing in and of itself, but still would have taken several hours to grind the grain and bake bread. But then she pulls out her leftover lunch. More barley, but ready to eat. And don't you know, this is emotional and spiritual whiplash for Naomi. Here she sits, grieving God's abandonment of her. And now this, sitting at her feet, provision beyond comparison, covenant love found not only in the rations, but in Ruth. And then we end right where we began, with contrast. But these contrasts are hitting a little different. In the beginning, these women were empty. Now they are full. Ruth is known as a seedless woman, but she has garnered an absurd amount of seed from Boaz's field. When last Naomi spoke of God, it was in curses, but now she's praying blessings. The women who had no future now have security because Ruth has been invited to glean for the rest of the harvest. And Naomi, she's beginning to turn from afflicted to affirmed. This is such beautiful encouragement. It's hard to believe that there could possibly be more. Oh, but there is more. I mean, just look, when Naomi discovers that it's in Boaz's field that Ruth has been gleaning, her eyes light up. She knows something. And it would seem in the ashes of her despair, new life is beginning to peek through. But you'll have to wait till next time to find out why. I'll see you then.